Picture this. November 5th, 1975. A 7-man logging crew is wrapping up a long, hard day in Arizona's Apache Sitgreaves National Forests. The sun's gone down, and they're all piling into their crew chief's truck, ready to head home. They had no idea that in just a few minutes, their lives were about to be turned upside down by an event that would spark one of the most famous and heated UFO debates in history. One of them, a two-year-old named Travis Walton, would disappear. The other 6 would be accused of his murder. This is the story of the Travis Walton incident, a case built on the testimony of multiple witnesses, a frantic 5-day manhunt, and a story so wild it still divides skeptics and believers. A truck carrying 7 exhausted loggers rattles down a dark forest road. Suddenly, a weird glow lights up the trees. It isn't a fire. It's a silent, hovering craft. One man, Travis Walton, gets out of the truck. His friends are screaming at him to get back in, but he's totally mesmerized. Then, a brilliant beam of light erupts from the craft and slams into him, throwing him to the ground. His 6 crewmates panic. They floor it, leaving him for dead. But when they get their act together and return just minutes later, the craft and Travis are gone. This was the beginning of a 5-day disappearance that launched a massive manhunt, fueled accusations of murder, and became the most documented and controversial alien abduction case on record. So, was it real, or was it just an elaborate lie? For Mike Rogers and his 6-man crew, the evening of November 5th, 1975, was supposed to be business as usual. They were working on a government contract to thin underbrush in the national forest. The deadline was looming, so they'd been putting in grueling hours. As they finally headed for home, a powerful light cut through the twilight sky. This was way brighter than the sunset, and it seemed to be coming from below the horizon. When they rounded a bend, they saw it. Hovering over a clearing about 100 feet away was a smooth, metallic disc-shaped object, maybe 20 feet across, giving off a soft yellow glow. The men just sat there, stunned into silence. The driver, Mike Rogers, slowed the truck to a stop. Before anyone could react, Travis Walton, in the passenger seat, opened his door and walked out. His crewmates yelled at him to get back in the truck. They were terrified. But Walton, driven by a curiosity that completely overrode his fear, walked right toward the object. He later said he was captivated, that he couldn't look away. As he stood underneath it, the craft started to make a low rumbling sound that quickly ramped up to a high-pitched whine. The crew watched in horror as a brilliant, turquoise beam shot from the bottom of the craft, hitting Walton in the chest and head. His body was lifted a foot into the air, arms and legs outstretched, and then thrown back about 10 feet. He landed on the ground like a wet rag, totally limp. The crew was sure he was dead. Pure panic took over the truck. Rogers, terrified the craft was coming for them next, slammed the accelerator and sped off. They didn't even look back until they were a quarter-mile down the road. That's when it hit them. They had just abandoned their friend. After a heated, panicked argument, they knew they had to go back. But when they returned to the clearing only a few minutes later, everything was eerily quiet. The craft was gone, and so was Travis Walton. The 6 loggers tore into the nearby town of Heba, an absolute mess of shock and panic. Their first instinct was to report it, but how? Who on earth would believe a story like that? They decided against using a payphone, convinced the police would think it was a prank. Instead, they drove to a crew member's house and, after more agonizing debate, finally called the sheriff's office. When Deputy Sheriff Chuck Ellison showed up, he found 6 men, some of them crying, all of them completely distressed, trying to tell him an impossible story about a flying saucer and their missing friend. Ellison was skeptical, but he couldn't deny their terror seemed real. He told them to head back to Heber and wait for Sheriff Marlin Gillespie. When Gillespie arrived and heard the tale, he immediately suspected foul play. To him, this wild story about a UFO didn't sound like an alien abduction. It sounded like a clumsy, even ridiculous cover-up for a murder. The next morning, the largest manhunt in the region's history kicked off. Helicopters and search parties on the ground combed the forest for any sign of Travis Walton. They found nothing. No body, no blood, no scraps of clothing, zero evidence of a struggle. As days passed without a trace of Walton, suspicion fell hard on the 6 witnesses. Both law enforcement and the public grew more convinced that the loggers had killed Travis and dumped his body. Headlines questioned their motives. A theory quickly formed that the crew, led by Mike Rogers, had cooked up the story to get out of their logging contract, which they were behind on. The men were shunned by their community, lost their jobs, and were treated like murder suspects. They were facing a homicide investigation, all while trying to process the trauma of what they'd seen. One officer reportedly told them, "People don't just vanish." The implication was crystal clear. Someone in that truck was responsible. Desperate to clear their names, the men agreed to take polygraph lie detector tests. For 5 days, the search for Travis went nowhere. The media frenzy exploded, and the pressure on Sheriff Gillespie to solve the case was immense. The 6 loggers were questioned over and over. To prove they hadn't harmed Travis, 5 of them took polygraph tests administered by the Arizona Department of Public Safety. All 5 of them passed. The 6th man, Alan Dalis, walked out of his test, reportedly furious about being accused of murder, and his result was officially ruled inconclusive. With 5 men passing, the police were stumped. Then, on the night of November 10th, 5 days and 6 hours after he disappeared, a phone rang at a gas station in Heber. It was a collect call from Travis Walton. His family, who had been gathered together, raced over. They found him at a phone booth, huddled on the ground. He was alive, but dazed, dehydrated, and about 5 pounds lighter. He was wearing the same clothes from the night he vanished, and had a 5-day beard. To him, it felt like only a few hours had passed. In the days that followed, Travis's memory of the missing time slowly started to come back. He recalled waking up on a table in a dimly lit, humid room, in terrible pain. He saw a strange rectangular box on his chest, pushed it away, and sat up. He realized he wasn't in a hospital. 3 figures were standing over him. They were short, under 5 feet tall, with large bald heads, huge brown eyes, and smooth, pale skin that he described as looking like a marshmallow. Terrified, he jumped off the table and started screaming at them. He grabbed a glassy-looking cylinder to defend himself, but the beings just turned and left the room without a word. Desperate for an escape, Travis ran down a hall into a circular room that looked like a planetarium, with a star map projected on a domed ceiling. As he looked around, a new figure appeared. This one looked human, a tall man with blonde hair and golden hazel eyes, wearing a helmet and a blue uniform. The man motioned for Travis to follow him. He led him out of the craft and into what looked like a massive hangar filled with other disc-shaped ships. Travis was taken to another room with more human-like beings. They laid him on a table, and one of them put a clear plastic mask over his face. He blacked out. The next thing he knew, he was waking up on a highway outside of Heber, with the saucer hovering above him before it shot silently into the night sky. Travis Walton was back, but his story just made things even crazier. The world was now split into 2 camps. Those who believed something extraordinary happened, and those who were sure it was all an elaborate hoax. On one hand, you have the witnesses. This has always been the foundation for believers. You've got 7 people all telling a consistent story. The initial police polygraphs showed 5 men passed, while 1 was inconclusive. That man, Alan Dallas, later retook a polygraph and passed. Over the years, Walton and other crew members have passed multiple additional lie detector tests. Supporters argue that the chances of 7 men keeping a complicated lie going for decades under intense pressure, without a single one of them cracking, are incredibly slim. But skeptics have plenty of ammo. The biggest motive they point to? That logging contract. The crew was behind schedule and facing a financial penalty. Could the whole story have been a scheme to use an act of God clause and get out of it? Then there are the polygraphs themselves. Skeptics love to point out, correctly, that lie detectors aren't foolproof and aren't allowed in court for a good reason. A prominent UFO debunker named Philip Klass reported that an early private polygraph test on Walton was a failure, with the examiner concluding Walton was engaged in gross deception and trying to cheat by holding his breath. Perhaps the most damning evidence for skeptics is that Travis and his family were known to be interested in UFOs. Just 2 weeks before the incident, a popular TV movie about the Betty and Barney Hill abduction had aired, leading some to suggest the Walton story was a copycat. And the complete lack of physical evidence at the site, no scorch marks, no impressions in the ground, nothing, only adds to the doubt. For nearly 50 years, the Travis Walton case has been a battleground in the UFO debate. It was made famous by Walton's book, The Walton Experience, and the 1993 film Fire in the Sky. Though it's important to note, the movie's scariest scenes were heavily dramatized and don't match Walton's actual account. Today, Travis Walton still stands by his story, frustrated by decades of debunking attempts. Interestingly, his own view of the event has softened. He no longer sees it as a malicious abduction but theorizes it might have been an accident. He suggests the beings were just studying the area, and after he was accidentally injured by the ship's energy, they took him aboard to save his life. What we're left with is a story that just doesn't have an easy answer. On one side, you have 7 witnesses who have stuck to their story for half a century, with a stack of past polygraph tests to back them up. On the other, you have a story that breaks the laws of physics, 0 physical proof, and some pretty good arguments for it all being a hoax. So what do you think? After all this time, where do you land? Was it one of the most credible alien encounters in history? Or was it all just a fire in the sky? Drop your theories in the comments.